The Miss Bellflower Books, A Cozy Murder Mystery, by Catherine Walton. Copyright 2025. Chapter 1, A Curious Letter. The kettle whistled just as the toast popped. Helen Dawson moved around her cozy yellow kitchen with practiced ease, wearing her favorite robin's egg blue cardigan over flannel pajamas patterned with teacups. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the dancing dust motes and filling the room with warmth. Halo, her yellow lab, was already nose-deep in the bread box. "Halo," she said with exaggerated sternness, "if you eat another sourdough heel, I'm putting you on a biscuit-only diet." Shadow, the black lab and his ever-watchful brother, let out a low huff and nudged the mail basket sitting on the counter. Helen poured her tea, lifted the kettle from the stove, and followed Shadow's gaze. "You're right, sweet boy. I haven't checked yesterday's mail." She pulled the basket toward her, flipping through catalogs, a donation request from the Wisteria Falls Library, and a single crisp envelope with her name written in elegant ink. No return address, no stamp. Frowning, she slid it open. Inside was a small card with a simple message: Bellflower Books, marked in red. A map was lightly sketched on the back, and there, drawn in red ink, was a bold X over the storefront of a long-abandoned bookshop, one town over in Cedar Hollow. Helen narrowed her eyes. "Well, that's not suspicious at all." Shadow let out a soft whine. Halo, still licking the toaster crumb tray, perked up at the tone of her voice. "Oh no," she said, grabbing her coat. "You two are coming with me, but I swear if either of you drool on any rare first editions, you're sleeping in the laundry room." As she packed a small tote bag, tea thermos, notepad, flashlight, just in case, her phone buzzed. It was Callie, her best friend and former bookstore co-worker turned self-declared paranormal hobbyist. "Callie, tell me you saw the news about Bellflower Books reopening? Some guy on a Facebook group said the lights were on last night." Helen paused. The timing was too perfect. Helen said, "Funny you mention it. I just got a letter. No stamp, no sender, just directions and a red X." Callie quipped back, "I'm coming with you." Helen returned, "Bring snacks." By the time Helen and the dogs reached Cedar Hollow, Callie was already there, sitting on the front steps of the shuttered shop with a cinnamon scone in one hand and a cold brew in the other. Bellflower Books was as she remembered it. Tall glass windows framed in faded green trim, a brass bell over the door, and shelves visible through the dusty panes like ghostly ribs of forgotten stories. But now the door was cracked open an inch, and the unmistakable scent of polished wood and fresh paper wafted out. Callie stood. "You sure you want to do this?" Helen grinned. "I was a baker for 30 years, Cal. I've stared down yeast that was scarier than this." She nudged the door open. It creaked on old hinges, and the interior revealed itself slowly, like a stage play waiting for its audience. Stacks of books, dust motes in the beams of filtered sunlight, a warmth in the air that didn't match the chill of fall. But the centerpiece of the room, the thing that stole Helen's breath, was the table in the center of the shop. On it sat a display case. Inside the case, beneath a cracked pane of glass, was a thick leather ledger bound in crimson red. And on the glass, scrawled in what appeared to be faded ink, "This book is cursed." Halo immediately jumped up and began sniffing the case. Shadow sat like a sphinx, unmoving. Callie stared. This place was supposed to be empty. Helen leaned in closer, frowning. Something inside the ledger shifted, or blinked, or maybe it was just the light. She straightened, suddenly aware of the silence. "Well," she said, voice dry, "it seems retirement is off the table again." Chapter 2, The Ledger and the Librarian. Helen stood perfectly still, blinking at the cracked glass of the display case. The red leather ledger inside gave off an odd aura, not glowing exactly, but as if it absorbed the light around it. It looked older than the shop itself, with gilded edges dulled by time and a silver clasp that bore no keyhole, only a carved bellflower in bloom. Callie leaned in, holding her coffee like a shield. "Is it just me, or does that book look like it's judging us?" It definitely has opinions, Helen murmured. Halo gave a short, muffled bark and tried to nose the glass. Stop it, Helen whispered, gently tugging him back. It's probably cursed with fleas. They both jumped as a voice rang out behind them. I wouldn't get too close. A woman stood in the archway that led to the back of the shop, arms crossed over a floral tunic, her graying curls tucked into a loose braid. She looked to be in her late 50s and wore large round glasses that magnified her wary gaze. Helen recognized her immediately. Delia? She asked, surprised. Delia Cartwright? The woman nodded. You have a good memory. You used to run the Cedar Hollow Public Library. I did, she replied, stepping closer. Until it caught fire last year. Some say it was lightning. Others say it was a book in the basement that should never have been shelved. Helen raised an eyebrow. And now you're here? Delia shrugged. Let's call it professional curiosity. Callie muttered, or professional ghost hunting. Delia ignored her. Arthur Pine, the man trying to reopen this place, found that ledger in the cellar beneath the shop. Said he couldn't get it open, but it kept ending up in different spots every morning. He joked that it was rearranging itself. Helen felt a chill. And where is Arthur now? Delia hesitated. No one's seen him in 2 days. He was supposed to meet a rare book dealer from Charleston, but he never showed. Callie's eyes widened. Wait, are you saying he just vanished? Not vanished, Delia's voice lowered. Disappeared under strange circumstances. The back office was locked from the inside. Lights were on. No sign of forced entry. Helen exchanged a look with Callie. I think we're already involved, whether we like it or not. Just then, the bell above the front door jingled. A tall man in a sheriff's uniform stepped inside, the sun catching the badge on his chest and the slight silver in his sideburns. Well, if it isn't Helen Dawson, he said, his smile wide and warm. Didn't expect to see you haunting bookshops today. Mike, Helen said, smiling despite herself. I might say the same about you. Sheriff Mike Trenton tipped his hat. Got a call from a neighbor who saw the lights back on and a yellow lab trying to lick the display window. Halo wagged furiously. Callie raised a hand. Guilty. Mike walked over to the display case and peered down. Is that the cursed book everyone's been whispering about? Delia nodded. It's older than anything in the town records. Helen looked up at him. And Arthur Pine? Still missing. We've got people out looking. No signs of foul play yet, but his car's still in the alley behind the shop. Callie winced. That's never good. Mike turned back to Helen. You have a nose for these things. If you feel something's off, I'll listen. Helen hesitated. I don't know yet, but that book, it feels wrong, like it's waiting. They all looked at the ledger. It sat silently under the glass. Shadow growled once, deep and low. Helen stepped back. We're going to need more tea. Chapter 3, marked in red. Helen didn't sleep well that night. She kept thinking about the ledger, about Arthur Pine's locked office, and about the way Halo had growled at it when they left the bookshop. Something he only did when encountering truly untrustworthy things, like raccoons or vacuum cleaners. By morning, she was sipping coffee in her sunroom while Shadow snoozed under her chair and Halo tried, and failed, to climb onto the window bench. Her mind raced. The red X on the letter, the locked from the inside office. The cursed ledger. There were no coincidences in cozy towns like Cedar Hollow, just well-dressed secrets. She pulled the letter back out and studied the map again. The X wasn't just over the bookshop. It was precisely centered on the building's old cellar entrance, long boarded up after a storm flooded it years ago. That made her sit straighter. She picked up her phone and called Mike. Tell me you're calling about coffee, he said, answering on the second ring. I'm calling about an X, Helen replied. The red one on the letter I got. I think it marks the entrance to the bookshop's old basement. Mike paused. You think it's connected to Pine's disappearance? I think it's worth checking. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. True to his word, he arrived just as Helen and the dogs did, Mike holding 2 travel mugs and a brown paper bag. Black, 2 sugars, he said. handing her the drink. "Still paying attention?" Helen said with a smile. "What's in the bag?" "Bribery scones." They walked around to the back alley behind Bellflower Books. The cellar entrance was exactly where she remembered, a slanted wooden bulkhead, half covered by ivy and sealed with a rusted padlock. Mike knelt and examined it. Old, but not untouched. "See this?" He pointed to scratch marks around the lock. "Someone tried to open it." "Recently?" Helen asked. He nodded. "I'd say within the last week. Could have been Arthur." He pulled out a keyring and selected a thin lockpick tool. "I won't ask how you learned to do that," Helen muttered. "I took a community course in my 20s, taught by a retired magician named Gerald." The lock popped open with a click. As Mike lifted the doors, the scent of damp stone and something older, like pressed parchment and fire ash, rose from below. Halo backed up a step. Shadow stood his ground. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. "I've got a flashlight," Helen offered. Mike raised an eyebrow. "You came prepared." "I have 2 dogs with better instincts than most crime labs. I always come prepared." They stepped carefully into the cellar, their footsteps echoing. The floor leveled out at the bottom, revealing an old brick corridor lined with wooden support beams and, surprisingly, empty display shelves. But it wasn't the shelves that drew Helen's attention. It was the faint red mark painted on the far wall. Another X, smaller, more deliberate, and just beside it what looked like a tiny hatch. Mike stepped forward and opened it. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a single, ancient-looking key, silver, with a handle shaped like a flower. "The bellflower," Helen whispered. "It matches the clasp on the ledger." Mike stared at it. "Maybe Arthur found this. Maybe he opened the book." Helen nodded. "And maybe that's when things started to go wrong." As they stood in silence, a soft thud echoed from deeper in the cellar, far beyond what they could see. Shadow growled, Halo whined, and for a moment the air around them felt watchful. Chapter 4. A Second Silence. Helen turned her flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through the cellar's dusty dark, but nothing moved. Just rows of wooden beams and old book crates long forgotten. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and aged paper. Halo crept forward, tail low but wagging, always hopeful. Shadow remained near Helen's heel, his posture alert, ears twitching. Mike stepped quietly, drawing closer to the back wall. "Stay here," he murmured. Helen followed anyway. "What part of stay sounds like a good idea in a mystery cellar?" she whispered. He gave her a sidelong glance. "Fair point." They reached the far end of the corridor, where the faint thud had come from. Mike slowly pushed open a warped wooden door with peeling green paint. Behind it, a small room. And in the center of that room, a circle of scorched floorboards. Helen stepped forward, shining her light down. The scorch mark was recent, the boards blackened but not cracked, like something had burned without fire. A folded scrap of paper lay at the edge of the circle. She picked it up carefully. Written in frantic, scrawling handwriting, "The book is a door. It opened. It wants out." Helen felt the chill in her spine tighten. "Arthur," she said quietly, "this is his handwriting. I saw a note of his pinned in the upstairs office." Mike took the paper and examined it. "It's barely dry. He was here not long ago." Halo barked once, then trotted to the far wall and began pawing at a stack of old crates. Helen joined him, tugging one aside, and revealed another door. Not wooden this time, but iron, with an inset lock that looked like it hadn't been touched in 50 years. Except it had. A faint smear of red dust, like powdered brick, lined the edge. Mike tried the key they'd found earlier. It slid in perfectly. The door creaked open. Behind it was a narrow passage, carved directly into stone. Cold air rushed out, tinged with minerals, and the sharp scent of something metallic. "Basement beneath the basement," Mike muttered. Helen stared into the darkness. "A vault?" "Looks like it." They backed out and closed the door carefully behind them, the key still in Mike's hand. "We'll need backup," he said, "and brighter flashlights." Helen looked back at the scorched floor. Something came through, she said, and I don't think it left. Back upstairs, Delia waited in the reading nook with Callie, sipping from a thermos. I assume you found something, she said, seeing the look on Helen's face. A burnt circle and a hidden iron door. Delia sat straighter. That sounds promising or terrifying. Shadow paced at the edge of the rug, unable to settle. Callie looked between them. So we're dealing with a possibly possessed book, a missing man, and a basement that goes deeper than it should? Mike nodded grimly. And an old key shaped like a flower. Delia stood and walked toward the front counter, where she began rifling through a small filing cabinet. Wait here, she said. She returned a moment later with a thin folder labeled Bellflower Society Restricted. I kept this from the old library archives, she said, handing it to Helen. They never digitized it. Most of the town has forgotten this even existed. Helen opened it slowly. Inside were sketches of the Bellflower family crest, notes about a secret society of guardians, and a photograph. Black and white, grainy, and oddly chilling. It showed the bookstore exactly as it stood now, and in the window sat the same red ledger, front and center. Only this photo was dated, 1908. Helen exhaled slowly. The book doesn't just belong here. It's been here all along. Chapter 5. A Body and a Book. The bookstore closed early that afternoon. Delia posted a simple note on the door. Closed for private event. Which, in the language of small-town shops, meant something's going on. But it's none of your business. Yet. Helen stood behind the front counter with Mike, Callie, and Delia, the folder of Bellflower Society documents spread open between them. The 1908 photograph stared up at them like a ghost made of paper and ink. That book, Callie whispered. It hasn't aged. Not a crack in the leather. It's as if it exists outside time, Delia murmured. And yet it always returns to this place. Mike tapped the photo. We need to know what happened to Arthur. If that book did something to him. Or if he opened something he shouldn't have, Helen added. Just then, Halo let out a sharp bark from the back hallway. Helen turned. He's near the office. Shadow was already on the move, tail stiff. The back office hadn't changed since their last visit, still filled with musty ledgers and old calendars. But now, the dogs were focused on a particular bookcase. Helen watched in growing confusion as Halo sniffed around the baseboard, then began pawing at it. There's something behind it, she said. Mike stepped in beside her and ran his hand along the edge. This part of the wall's hollow. He found a small latch just behind the top shelf. With a quiet click, the entire bookcase swung forward an inch. Hidden door. Helen's heart thumped as they eased it open. Behind it was a narrow room no more than 10 feet long, lined with empty wooden shelves and reeking of old wax. In the center of the room was a chair, and slumped in that chair was a figure. Callie gasped and turned away. Helen stepped forward slowly, flashlight trembling in her hand. Arthur Pine. His eyes were closed. His shirt was stained with a single dark patch over the heart. A faint trace of dried blood ran from his nose. A leather satchel sat in his lap, half open, with the red ledger placed gently inside it. Delia crossed herself. Oh, Arthur. Mike checked his pulse, already knowing the answer. He's gone. No wounds except... He pulled the shirt gently aside. A single puncture. Helen looked closer. That's not from a knife. That's something thinner, like a stylus. Mike stood. Someone knew how to make it quick, almost surgical. They backed out, Mike making the call to the coroner as Helen closed the secret door gently behind her. Back in the main shop, the air had changed. Quieter, heavier. The ledger now sat on the counter. No one had touched it, and yet it was open. One line had been written in ink, so dark it gleamed. One more to remember. Helen stared at it, her fingers tingling. Callie clutched her arm. Helen, it's writing by itself. The ink shimmered, then dried. Mike returned, his face pale. Coroner's en route. I'll handle the paperwork. Helen didn't look away from the book. We need to know who wrote that line and what it's remembering. Delia nodded toward the folder. There's mention of a vault and a guardian. If the society truly existed, then someone must still be watching. Helen looked at the book, then at the iron key still hanging from her necklace. The door beneath the basement, she said. That's where the answers are. Chapter 6. Frankie Vanishes. The next morning, Helen found herself pacing her kitchen, the red ledger locked in a fireproof safe at the bottom of her linen closet. She didn't trust it anywhere else. She didn't trust it, period. Halo trotted beside her, occasionally glancing at the closet with a suspicious sniff. Shadow stayed near the door, ears perked. At exactly 8:47 a.m., her phone buzzed. Mike, we've got a problem. Helen, bigger than the book writing its own creepy journal entries? Mike. Frankie Bell is missing. That made her stop cold. Frankie Bell, the town's affable, sweater-wearing bookseller and distant descendant of the Bellflower family, had been helping restore the shop's collection. He was the one who insisted the store could be something special again. The one who believed in second chances, for books and people alike. Helen called Mike immediately. What do you mean, missing? She asked. He didn't open the shop this morning, Mike said. His neighbor said she saw him pacing his porch last night, muttering something about pages talking. Now he's gone. His dog's still in the yard. Front door unlocked. No sign of struggle, but his phone's on the kitchen table. Helen felt her heart sink. Do you think it's connected? I do, Mike said quietly. And I think it's tied to the book, or the vault beneath it. Helen looked at her dogs. We'll meet you at the shop. The bookstore was quiet when she arrived. The bell above the door gave a familiar chime that somehow sounded off. Delia was already there, looking pale, clutching a notebook filled with scribbled notes from the Bellflower Society folder. If Frankie's gone, then the book has claimed too, she said softly. Callie stood nearby, rifling through the checkout counter. He left his keys in the register. He wouldn't do that unless he meant to come back. Helen walked past them and stood before the fireproof safe tucked beneath the stairs. I locked it last night, she said. She opened it. It was empty. Everyone fell silent. Did you move it? Mike asked. No, Helen said flatly. I haven't touched it since I put it away. Delia's face went pale. It's moving on its own now? Halo sniffed the floor and barked twice, his tail low and stiff. Shadow followed the scent trail to the back corner, pawing at the floorboards. Helen joined them, kneeling beside a loose board. Together, she and Mike pried it up and found a small leather-bound journal, Frankie's. She opened it slowly, flipping past doodles and notes about the shop's renovation. Toward the back, his handwriting grew jagged. The book speaks when no one listens. It shows you what you miss. And then it asks for more. On the last page, a list of names. Helen, Arthur, Frankie, a fourth name scribbled out, and then at the very bottom, next, the vault. Callie peered over her shoulder. It's like he knew. Mike nodded grimly, which means he may have gone down there, alone. Helen rose to her feet. Then that's where we're going next. Delia looked nervous. Shouldn't we wait for reinforcements? Helen shook her head. If the book has him, or if he's still alive, we don't wait. She turned to Halo and Shadow. Ready? Halo barked once, already moving toward the cellar door. Shadow followed without hesitation, and Helen, heart pounding, took the first step down. Chapter 7. The Key and the Collector. The cellar stairs creaked beneath their weight as Helen, Mike, Delia, and the dogs descended into the cool hush of the basement. The air smelled the same, damp stone and old paper, but something about it felt heavier, like they were walking into memory itself. Helen carried the silver key on a chain around her neck, its bellflower-shaped handle cool against her skin. She could feel it pulsing faintly, like it knew it was getting closer to home. They reached the iron door. Mike tested the hinges. Still unlocked. Then Frankie went through, Helen said. "Let's go." She slipped the key into the latch and turned. The door groaned open. They stepped into a narrow tunnel carved from raw stone, the walls embedded with rusted iron sconces and ancient nails. The temperature dropped several degrees. The flashlight beam danced ahead, revealing a descending slope. Shadow went first, tail high and body alert. Halo followed, ears back but determined. Halfway down, they spotted a break in the wall, a natural alcove filled with scrolls and broken stone tablets. Helen paused, brushing dust from one and holding it under her light. Carved on the surface, a symbol, a bellflower, with a key through the center. Delia inhaled. "That's the seal of the Guardian's vault." They continued forward until the tunnel opened into a domed chamber lined with cracked bookcases and old stone plinths, and in the center, resting on a pedestal of polished obsidian, was the ledger. Somehow, impossibly, it had returned. Helen stepped forward slowly. "It wants us here." Delia nodded. "And it brought us something else." She gestured toward the far wall, where a man's jacket hung from a hook. Beneath it, a satchel. Inside, Frankie's notebook, a thermos of tea, and a small metal object wrapped in cloth. Helen opened the cloth. A thin, stylized knife, no longer than her palm, its handle inscribed with the words, "For memory." Mike stiffened. "That's the tool that killed Arthur." Delia whispered, "It's ceremonial. For an old rite. Not meant to kill, but to mark." Helen looked at her. "To mark what?" Delia glanced around the room. "To mark passage." Before Helen could respond, Shadow let out a sharp bark. At the edge of the chamber, the wall had shifted. A crack widened, revealing another narrow hallway, this one lit by flickering sconces that hadn't been lit moments ago. Someone, or something, was already inside. Callie appeared behind them, breathless. "Sorry, I couldn't wait upstairs. You're not leaving me out of this adventure." Helen turned toward the new corridor, eyes narrowing. "Then let's go together." They stepped into the flickering light, the ledger now behind them, silent but watching. Chapter 8. The Cottage in the Pines. The corridor narrowed, lit by old iron sconces that flared to life as they passed, though none of them touched a single flame. The walls were engraved with scenes, faded depictions of people placing books on altars, cloaked figures standing watch, and again, that same bellflower symbol blooming between lines of text no one could read. "I feel like we're walking through a legend," Callie whispered. Helen said nothing, but she felt it too, that weight of the past pressing in from all sides, as if the stone itself remembered. They emerged into a chamber carved in perfect symmetry, where a wrought iron spiral staircase rose to a trapdoor overhead. The air smelled different here, less earth, more pine and smoke. Mike looked up. "That doesn't lead back into the bookshop." "No," Delia said, already moving toward it. "That's the Bellflower cottage." "The what now?" Callie asked. Delia placed a hand on the railing. "The original caretaker's home, hidden in the woods above Cedar Hollow, abandoned since the 1950s. Helen's brow furrowed. Why would this passage connect to it? "Because," Delia said, looking at Helen with eerie calm, "the Guardians lived in secret. Their homes were part of the vault network. One protected the books. One protected the people." They climbed. The staircase creaked with every step, but it held, spiraling up into dim light. At the top, Helen pushed open the trapdoor. Fresh air greeted her, cold, pine-scented, and real. They emerged into a small cottage tucked deep in a wooded grove. The windows were intact, the furniture still standing, though covered in a thick layer of dust. Motes danced in the light filtering through a stained glass window shaped like an open book. And in the center of the room, a fire had recently been lit. Mike drew his weapon. "Someone's been here." Shadow growled softly, his ears flicking. They moved slowly, checking each room. A single teacup sat on a table in the kitchen. Still warm. Someone had just been here. Then, from the back of the cottage, a faint noise, a cough. Helen and the others rushed toward it. There, half hidden beneath a blanket on an old cot, lay Frankie Bell. Alive. His eyes fluttered open. "Helen?" he rasped. She knelt beside him. "You're safe now. We found you." Frankie coughed again and tried to sit up. "The book. It showed me things. Not just stories, memories, echoes. It kept saying, 'Remember what was lost.'" Helen exchanged a glance with Delia. "What did it show you?" Mike asked gently. Frankie's eyes unfocused. "A ceremony. A promise. Someone tried to stop it, long ago. The book, it remembers pain, and it marks those who carry it." He grasped Helen's wrist. "It likes you." She stilled. "Be careful," he whispered. "If it chooses you, you can't walk away." Then he slumped back into the cot, exhausted but breathing. Mike let out a breath. "We should get him out of here." Callie looked around the room. "This place gives me the creeps, but it's peaceful. Like a sanctuary built on a battlefield." Helen turned to the fire. It had burned low now, but not out. And beside it, on the mantel, sat a second ledger. Smaller, older, bound in white leather with a cracked bellflower pressed into its cover. Helen reached for it. Inside, blank pages, waiting. Chapter 9, Secrets Beneath the Floorboards. Helen cradled the white leather ledger in her hands as the others tended to Frankie. Its cover felt smooth but cold, like porcelain left too long in the shade. The pressed bellflower emblem on the front was worn nearly flat with time. It bore no title, no clasp, no explanation. Just potential. She opened it. The pages were blank, at first. Then slowly, as if breathing in her presence, faint handwriting began to bloom on the parchment. Not ink, something more ethereal, like memory revealing itself. Callie leaned in over her shoulder. "Okay, that's either magic or some very advanced ink tech." Helen read aloud. "Guardians are not born. They are chosen by the remembering." Delia inhaled sharply. "That's a phrase from the Bellflower Society scrolls. The Guardian's task was to bear memory of the town, of its secrets, of what must be kept hidden." Mike helped Frankie sit up, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "If Helen was marked by the book, maybe she's the next guardian." Helen gave him a look. "I bake muffins and walk Labradors, Mike." "You also solve murders and track cursed objects through underground libraries," Callie said with a wink. "Don't sell yourself short." Shadow pawed at a spot on the floorboards beneath the hearth. Halo joined in, tail wagging as if they'd found something exciting. Helen stepped over and knelt beside them. The boards were loose. She pried one up. Inside was a shallow compartment, and within it, a velvet pouch. She opened it carefully to reveal a delicate necklace bearing the same bellflower symbol. It shimmered faintly, as if reacting to the ledger. Delia's voice was reverent. "That's a guardian's token." Helen hesitated only a moment before placing it around her neck. Nothing exploded, but the white ledger shimmered faintly in response, and a new line appeared. "The one who carries the flower must seal the vault when memory stirs." Helen closed the book. "We're sealing that vault," she said. "Tonight." Mike raised an eyebrow. "You don't want to study it first? Maybe read a few more haunted diary entries?" "Nope," Helen said, standing. "Every time someone opens it, someone else vanishes, passes out, or turns up with a cryptic message. I've had enough of that this week." Frankie chuckled weakly. Can't argue with that. Callie slung her tote over her shoulder. "I brought sage, salt, and cinnamon gum, just in case we need snacks or ward off spirits." Helen smiled. "Good thinking." As they gathered their things, the dogs hovered near the door, already sensing their next destination. The sun was setting as they left the cottage, the air thick with pine and possibility. Helen clutched the white ledger under her arm and rested a hand on the bellflower necklace. She didn't know exactly what waited in the vault beneath Bellflower Books. But she was going to face it, with a key, a purpose, and two very loyal dogs. Chapter 10. A hidden room and a haunting truth. By the time Helen, Mike, Callie, Delia, and the dogs returned to Bellflower Books, night had fallen. The lamplight outside glowed amber, casting flickering shadows across the sidewalk. It was the kind of night when secrets felt safer creeping into the open. Inside, the shop was silent, except for the faint hum of an old ceiling fan. Frankie had insisted on resting at the cottage under Delia's watch. Helen promised to return with answers, and not to let the book win. The cellar door creaked open beneath her hand. This time, she said, we're finishing it. Shadow and Halo padded ahead, as always, their confidence oddly reassuring. The group descended to the basement, then down into the deeper passage, the stone corridor that led to the iron door. Mike walked beside her. Are you sure about this? No, Helen said honestly, but I can't let anyone else be hurt. She drew the key from around her neck. It clicked smoothly into the vault's ancient lock. The door opened. The chamber beyond looked different this time. Where once it was dusty and abandoned, now it pulsed with a soft, warm glow. The red ledger floated in the center of the room, just inches above its pedestal. The white ledger in Helen's arms pulsed in response. Whoa, Callie whispered. Okay, we're officially past weird and into storybook territory. Helen stepped forward. The moment she crossed the threshold, the red ledger opened by itself. A wind stirred, though nothing around them moved. Words formed on the page. To remember is to protect. To forget is to release. You must choose. Mike placed a steadying hand on her back. What does it mean? Delia stepped beside them. The guardians weren't just keepers, they were editors. They chose which memories to preserve and which to let go. Helen looked at the floating book. So I'm supposed to erase something? The red ledger turned a page. Now it showed 3 entries, each with a name. Arthur Pine, Frankie Bell, Helen Dawson. A faint flicker moved beneath her name, like a cursor waiting for her to type. Callie pointed to the white ledger. Try writing there. Helen opened it. The page shimmered once, and then lines began to form beneath her pen, guided by instinct more than thought. Arthur, remembered with honor. Frankie, remembered with hope. Helen, keeper of stories, not forgotten, not erased. The red ledger glowed, then snapped shut with a puff of old air. The pedestal beneath it sank slowly into the floor, sealing it beneath polished stone etched with vines and bellflowers. A soft chime rang out from nowhere, final, peaceful. Helen stood still, heart pounding. The room dimmed, the wind ceased, and the vault felt quiet. Shadow barked once. Halo sneezed. And just like that, the chamber returned to stillness. Helen exhaled. It's done, she said. Mike looked at her. You sure? Yes, whatever it was. It's sleeping again. They left the vault in silence, the iron door sealing gently behind them. Back in the bookstore, everything felt lighter. Callie flipped the sign to open tomorrow with a proud grin. Mike turned to Helen. So, dinner? Maybe something without ancient curses on the side? Helen smiled. Only if you bring dessert. Deal. As they walked out into the night, Helen looked back once more. The bellflower carved above the door seemed brighter, inviting, watching, waiting. Chapter 11. The Vault Under Bellflower. Helen couldn't sleep. She rose before dawn, leaving Halo and Shadow snoring softly at the foot of her bed, and made her way back to Bellflower Books. The streets of Cedar Hollow were still, the morning mist curling low across cobblestones like lazy fog cats. She unlocked the door quietly, the bell above chiming, as if greeting an old friend. The red ledger remained sealed beneath the vault, but the white one, the guardian's ledger, sat open on the counter where she'd left it. Its pages now held soft etchings, names, places, brief snatches of history. It had begun recording again. She flipped to the back and saw her own name written once more. Helen Dawson, the listener, the link. She exhaled. Then something caught her eye, a faint line beneath the last entry, almost invisible. She ran her finger over it. The ink deepened. Turn the stone in the vault's heart. Helen blinked. Excuse me? Half an hour later, she was back beneath the shop, this time with just Shadow and Halo. Mike was out delivering a report to the sheriff's office. Delia had taken Frankie to the clinic for a checkup. Callie was at her cafe baking cinnamon swirls for morale. So it was just Helen and the stone. She descended into the vault, which had returned to its natural state, silent, still, solemn. The pedestal had vanished, replaced by the polished seal now carved into the floor. At its center, a small, round stone that didn't quite match the rest, just barely raised, fingertip-sized. She hesitated, then pressed it. A soft click echoed in the chamber, and suddenly a section of the wall slid open, revealing a spiral staircase leading even deeper. Halo barked once. Shadow stepped forward immediately, tail still, gaze fixed. Helen grinned. What would I do without you two? They descended. At the bottom they found a second chamber, smaller than the first, but lined with shelves holding books unlike anything Helen had ever seen. Some were bound in faded velvet, others had no titles. One glowed faintly blue, and in the center, a small wooden desk with a leather-bound journal resting open. Helen approached, gently brushing dust from the cover. The Chronicles of the Bellflower Guardians. She turned the first page. Inside were entries from every guardian before her, short notes, personal reflections, and warnings. One line struck her. The book does not bind you. It guides you. But it can be fooled. By greed, by silence, by those who write without heart. Another read, If the world forgets its stories, the shadows take root. Helen sat on the bench beside the desk, heart steady now. She opened to a fresh page, uncapped her pen, and began to write. My name is Helen Dawson. I am a retired baker, a dog lover, a reluctant sleuth, and apparently a guardian. This is what I know. Books remember, and so must we. Chapter 12. Shadows in the Stacks. The next day, Bellflower Books reopened its doors. Helen had spent the morning rearranging the front display, deliberately leaving out anything with red or glowing ink. Callie arrived early, arms full of cinnamon scones and a jar of clover honey. Delia came soon after, armed with historical notes and a fresh roll of secret society parchment paper, which she claimed would make for excellent themed bookmarks. Halo naturally tried to eat one. Shadow took up his usual post under the front window, watching passers-by like a silent, four-legged sentinel. Mike walked in just after 10, wearing a light blue shirt and carrying a paper bag from his favorite deli. Lunch for the staff, he said, placing it on the counter. And by staff, I mean you, Callie, Delia, and the dogs. Helen grinned. If the dogs count as employees, I'll need to start paying them in jerky. You already do. As customers began to trickle in, mostly regulars, curious about the shop's sudden popularity, Helen noticed something strange. Several patrons wandered toward a far corner of the store without prompting. She followed their glances and saw it. A slim, untitled book had appeared on the lowest shelf of the fiction section. Its cover was faded, its spine worn, but people were drawn to it, as if it whispered something only they could hear. Delia noticed too. That wasn't there yesterday. Helen picked it up. The cover was blank, but inside were short stories, poems, and fragments. Some were dated. Some were signed with initials. All of them felt familiar. It's a memory book, she whispered, collected pieces from the Guardian vault. Callie took a peek and gasped. This one's about a girl who saved a library from a fire in 1947. I've heard that story from my grandma. Helen tucked the book behind the counter. Maybe not for public reading just yet. As the day went on, the shop buzzed with quiet joy. Old stories resurfaced, new ones found eager listeners, and Halo managed to knock over a display of mystery novels before stealing a biscotti from someone's tote. Mike lingered after closing. So, he said, leaning on the counter, what's next for our guardian? Helen looked around the shop. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting golden light through the bellflower-shaped window. "I think I'll keep writing," she said, "and maybe keep listening." "To the book?" "To the people," she replied. "The book's important, but it's the people who carry the stories." Mike nodded, then smiled. "Dinner tonight?" Helen chuckled. "As long as it doesn't involve breaking into any secret vaults." "I make no promises." Shadow thumped his tail. Halo yawned loudly. Helen turned the sign on the door to closed, then tucked the slim, memory-filled book beneath her arm. "I think we're ready," she said, "for whatever comes next." Chapter 13, The Guardian's Test. 2 days after the shop reopened, the dreams began. Helen would drift off to sleep in her cozy bed, Halo curled at her feet, Shadow breathing softly nearby, and find herself walking through the stacks of Bellflower Books. Only they were taller, endless, and shifting. Books whispered, some called her name, some called for help. And one, always the same one, asked a question: "What will you forget to remember?" She woke each time just before answering. On the third morning, she returned to the vault. This time she came alone. She brought only the white ledger, her pen, and a thermos of hot tea. The vault greeted her with silence, but the air was expectant, like the hush before a curtain rises. The floor glowed faintly beneath the bellflower seal. Helen stepped forward. The white ledger opened in her hands. A single phrase appeared. "The final test is choice, memory or mercy." Helen stared at it. "What does that mean?" she asked aloud. The book's pages turned on their own. Now they showed brief glimpses, like flashes of memory not her own. Arthur Pine, kneeling in the vault, whispering to someone unseen. Frankie, touching the ledger with tears in his eyes. A young girl in 1923 placing a letter into a hollow wall, her face etched with sorrow. Then a vision of Helen herself, sitting behind the bookshop counter, greeting a boy who looked lost, handing him a book he didn't know he needed. The final image was a blank page. Waiting. Helen placed her hand on it, and this time she understood. The vault could erase pain. It could offer comfort by forgetting the sharpest edges of truth. But in doing so, it also dulled meaning. To remember was to carry the weight. To forget was to leave stories unfinished. She uncapped her pen and wrote, "I choose memory. Let the pain be known. Let the joy endure. Let the truth guide those who follow." The ledger shimmered. Then the stone beneath her feet glowed bright, soft, silver light blooming like moonlight on snow. A gentle voice echoed in her mind, not frightening, familiar. "You have chosen well, Helen Dawson. The vault sleeps, but the world will wake." The light faded. Helen exhaled and smiled. She turned and climbed back into her bookshop, greeted by sunlight streaming through the front windows and the muffled jingle of the bell as someone opened the door. Callie poked her head in. "You're here early." Helen held up the white ledger. "Had some writing to do." "Anything exciting?" Helen shrugged. "Just passing a test." Callie raised an eyebrow. "You aced it, I hope." "We'll find out," Helen said, and behind her the vault closed quietly once more. Chapter 14, Descent into Ashes. Rain fell that evening, gentle but insistent. Helen stood at the front window of Bellflower Books, watching drops race each other down the glass. Behind her, the store glowed warm and inviting. A kettle whistled in the back room. Halo was asleep in the fiction aisle, and Shadow sat near the counter, head tilted toward the door. Then the lights flickered, just once, then again. And then the fire alarm chirped. Helen's pulse jumped. She hurried to the back, sniffing the air. No smoke, no heat. But something was wrong. Shadow stood alert now, ears stiff. Halo let out a low growl. She followed them toward the cellar. The trap door to the vault was ajar. "Impossible," she whispered. She had sealed it. The ledgers were safe. The vault had gone quiet. Helen grabbed her flashlight and started down. The air grew warmer as she descended, far warmer than it should have been. A soft red light pulsed from beneath the vault door. When she opened it, her breath caught. The seal had cracked. The red ledger was gone, and in its place, fire licked along the stone floor, controlled, contained, but alive. Mike burst through the trapdoor seconds later, soaked from the rain. "Got your message. What happened?" Helen pointed. "Something's breached the seal." A sound, like a whisper wrapped in thunder, rippled through the chamber. From the shadows stepped a figure cloaked in deep green, face hidden beneath a wide hood, in their hand, the red ledger. "I tried to stop it," they said. The voice was neither male nor female, old nor young. It simply was. "You're the missing name," Helen said, stepping forward. "The guardian who vanished." The figure nodded. "I was weak. I sealed the vault not with memory, but with fear. It was never meant to last." Mike looked at Helen. "So, what now?" The cloaked guardian held out the red ledger. "You must burn it." Helen's eyes widened. "What?" "It is a false copy, a trick of the vault, created in panic. It has no right to survive." Helen reached out slowly. The ledger was warm, too warm. It pulsed with stolen memories, flickering with faces not hers. And for the first time she realized it wasn't a record. It was a parasite. Shadow growled. Halo barked. Helen walked to the center of the room where the fire danced. She hesitated. Mike stepped beside her. "You okay?" She nodded. "I just hate burning books." Then she tossed the red ledger into the flames. It didn't scream. It simply folded in on itself, quietly, without protest, and vanished into ash. The flames died down. The air cooled. And the vault sighed like something ancient had finally exhaled. The cloaked figure stepped back. "It's done now. This place is yours, and the stories are safe." Helen wanted to ask more, but the figure was already fading, dissolving like mist. Mike looked around. "That was strangely peaceful," Helen said. They returned to the shop in silence. The rain had stopped. Above them, the bellflower window glowed soft gold. Chapter 15. A Promise and a Path Forward. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the scent of pine drifting on the breeze through open windows. Helen stood in the kitchen of Bellflower Books pouring 2 mugs of hot tea, one for herself and one for Mike, who leaned against the doorway looking far too pleased with himself for someone who had barely slept. "So," he said, taking his mug, "no ancient curses today? No trapdoors or glowing books?" "Not before noon," Helen teased. Shadow padded in and sat at her feet, noble and calm as always. Halo arrived moments later with an old sock in his mouth, tail wagging as if he'd single-handedly, or single-pawedly, saved the world. "I think they deserve a day off," Mike said, patting Halo's head. Helen looked around the store. Quiet, peaceful, safe. For now. Callie came in at 10 sharp with muffins and a handwritten sign. Free coffee for book lovers, and dog lovers too. She stuck it in the window with pride. Delia popped in an hour later with a crate of old local history books she'd totally not stolen from the town archive. "They were just sitting there," she insisted, "and they like it better here." Frankie called from the cottage, still resting, but stronger. "Tell the bookshop I said thank you," he murmured over the phone, "and tell the dogs they're heroes." Helen laughed and promised she would. By mid-afternoon, the bookstore buzzed with its usual quiet magic, pages turning, quiet voices, the scent of cinnamon and coffee. The red ledger was gone. The vault was sealed, and the white ledger now lived on a shelf behind the counter, blank for now, but waiting patiently. Helen picked it up just once that day, to add a final note. Guardianship is not a title. It's a willingness to listen, to remember, to protect stories, even the ones that scare us. She closed the book. Mike appeared at her elbow, holding 2 paper bags. "Dinner. I didn't cook. You're welcome." She smiled. "I guess we're making a habit of this." "I don't mind," he said, then paused. "You know, I've been thinking—" "Dangerous," she teased. He grinned. "Maybe. But what if we took a weekend? Just you, me, the dogs, and a cabin by the lake." Helen arched a brow. "No books with moving ink? No secret tunnels?" "Nope. Just stars and s'mores." She considered for a long, playful moment. You bring the marshmallows, I'll bring the mystery novel. He raised his bag. Deal. As the sun dipped low, casting gold over the bookshelves and the bellflower window above, Helen locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. Halo flopped onto the rug. Shadow settled by the fire. And Helen, guardian, baker, friend, sat down at her desk, a fresh notebook open in front of her. She uncapped her pen. Chapter 1, she wrote, of the next story. And somewhere, in the oldest corners of Bellflower Books, something ancient smiled. Not a curse, not a threat, just a story waiting for its turn to be told. Epilogue. Between the pages. Weeks passed. The leaves outside Bellflower Books began to blush with autumn's touch, gold, amber, and soft red, dancing through the trees like whispered secrets. Helen had changed the front display to feature cozy mysteries, vintage poetry, and books with particularly satisfying endings. Halo had taken to greeting customers by bringing them socks he'd collected from some unseen stash. Shadow, the more reserved of the two, curled beside children who read aloud in the corner, thumping his tail softly with every page turn. Frankie sent postcards from his travels, always signed with a doodle of a bellflower and a cryptic message like, "Found a library in a lighthouse, details to follow." Callie's Cafe became the unofficial headquarters for book club conspiracies. Delia launched her own side business, Secrets and Spines, historical tours of hidden places. And Mike? Mike kept showing up. For coffee, for dog walks, for quiet dinners that often ended with laughter, and maybe, just maybe, a kiss on the porch. One crisp evening, Helen stood in the doorway of the shop with her mug of tea and watched the town settle under twilight. The wind whispered. The bell above the shop door jingled, though no one had entered. Behind the counter, the white ledger shimmered gently. Helen smiled. We're not done, are we? The book didn't answer, of course, but it didn't need to. Some stories weren't meant to end. They simply waited, patient and quiet, between the pages. Later that night, as Helen cleaned up a stack of returned books, she found a note tucked between the pages of a dusty gardening manual. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, looping, and tinged with urgency. Arthur didn't fall. He was silenced by someone who feared the truth inside the ledger. Be careful what you remember. There was no signature, just the faint image of a bellflower stamped at the bottom. Helen stared at the note, her pulse quickening. So Arthur Pine hadn't simply vanished. He had been erased, not by time, but by intent. She folded the note gently and slid it into the white ledger. The next story was already beginning. The end, for now,